listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1. The Shadow of the Flawed Wolf. The wind that swept through the Shadowfen territories always carried a bite, a cold whisper that spoke of ancient pines and deep, unforgiving shadows. But for Alara, the chill she felt was born from within, a permanent frost that had settled in her bones 18 years ago, the night she was born under a silent, moonless sky. They called her the Flawed One, the broken link in a chain of formidable strength. A curse upon the proud and brutal Shadowfen pack. While her packmates shifted into massive wolves, their fur a unified tapestry of proud obsidian and fierce charcoal, Alara's transformation was a spectacle of agony. It was never a full, clean change. It was a battle her body always lost, a painful, halting process that left her trapped between forms, a creature of neither world, gasping and broken. Her wolf, when it dared to surface, was a pale, shimmering silver, a ghostly apparition next to their solid, powerful forms. Its fur was the color of moon dust, a stark and shameful contrast to their night-kissed hides. Tonight, under the rising gibbous moon, the air was thick with anticipation for the great hunt. The pack's strongest would bring down the legendary snow stag, a ritual to honor the moon goddess and secure their dominance for the coming year. Alara trailed at the very back of the hunting party, a silent ghost in the vibrant, violent life of her pack. The weight of the waterskins she was forced to carry dug into her slender shoulders, a physical burden that was nothing compared to the crushing weight of their disdain. Try to keep up, half-wolf. The voice was a familiar blade, sharp and cold. It was Reese, the Alpha's son. He stood on a ridge ahead, silhouetted against the twilight sky. He was everything a Shadowfen heir should be, broad-shouldered, confident, his very presence radiating a power that was second only to his father's. There was a time, a faint, fading memory from their puphood, when his voice had been kind. When he had been the one to help her up after a fall. Now, his words were just another stone in the wall of isolation that surrounded her. She lowered her silver-eyed gaze, pulling her worn leather tunic tighter. "I am keeping up, Reese." He let out a short, derisive laugh that echoed in the clearing. "Your definition of keeping up would see us all starve by winter. The great hunt waits for no one, least of all a defect." Before she could reply, a presence more immense and chilling than the mountain wind itself emerged from the ancient trees. Alpha Borvin. He was a mountain of a man. His face a roadmap of old scars and colder judgments. His eyes, like chips of flint, scanned the party and landed on Alara with palpable disgust. "Why is this creature still polluting our hunt?" His voice was a low growl that vibrated in the very marrow of her bones. "Her weakness is a stench in the air. It will scare off the prey." "She was falling behind, father," Reese reported, his tone shifting to one of eager subservience. "I was just urging her to hasten her pace." "Pace?" Borvin took a menacing step toward Alara. Instinctively, she flinched, her foot catching on a gnarled root. She stumbled, landing hard on the damp, leafy ground. A wave of snickers rippled through the nearby young warriors. The sound was more painful than the impact. "It should not be here at all. Look at it. Pale skin, hair like weak sunlight, eyes like a misty day. There is not a drop of true Shadowfen strength in its veins. It is a walking insult to our bloodline." Tears of hot shame pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them that victory. Scrambling to her feet, she grabbed the heavy waterskins, her arms trembling with the effort. "Get up," Borvin commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Make yourself useful. Take these to the Omega Post and stay there. I do not want to see your pathetic face again until the stag is felled and the feast is ready." Head bowed, Alara turned and trudged off the main path, toward the designated spot where the lowest-ranked Omegas would wait. The humiliation was a familiar cloak, heavy and suffocating. Once she was sure she was out of sight, she sank against the rough bark of a towering ironwood tree, the waterskins thudding to the forest floor. The silence of the woods was a small mercy, but it was in this silence that the yearning inside her grew loudest. Her wolf was not a monster. It was a frightened, trapped part of her own soul, clawing desperately at the walls of its flawed prison. She closed her eyes, reaching for it not with force, as the pack elders demanded, but with a gentle, internal plea. Please, just for a moment, let me feel what it is to be whole. A familiar, dreaded tremor started in her limbs. A wave of searing heat washed over her, followed by the excruciating grind of bone and the tear of muscle. Her senses sharpened dizzyingly, the scent of loam, the musk of a distant fox, the frantic heartbeat of a mouse 100 yards away. But then, as always, it stopped. The transformation slammed to a halt. She was on all fours, her body a grotesque parody, patches of silver fur on human skin, her hands twisted into half-formed paws, her face a distorted mask. A whimper of pure frustration and agony escaped her throat, a sound from both girl and beast. Defeated, the shift receded like a painfu. Tide, leaving her naked, shivering, and utterly broken in the gathering gloom. This was her curse. This was why they hated her. She wasn't just different, she was incomplete, a failed creation. A soft crunch of leaves nearby made her heart leap into her throat. She scrambled to cover herself with her arms, her eyes wide with fear. Rhys stood there, his expression unreadable. It wasn't the usual contempt, but something more complicated, something that looked almost like pain. I saw, he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. He averted his gaze, his jaw tight, and pulled off his own dark tunic. He tossed it to her, and it landed in a heap at her feet. Here, cover yourself. She quickly pulled the rough spun cloth over her head. It was warm from his body and smelled of pine and cold night air. You shouldn't be here, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Your father. I know what my father is, Rhys cut in, a flicker of something dark in his eyes. He took a hesitant step closer. Alara, do you remember? When we were pups, before our first shifts, we used to lie in the meadows and trace the constellations. You told me you wanted to run with the stars themselves. The memory was a ghost, beautiful and painful. A time before destiny and power had carved a chasm between them. A time when they were just Rhys and Alara. That was a lifetime ago, she said, her voice flat. Why? He asked, his voice laced with a frustration that mirrored her own. Why does it happen? Why can't you change? A bitter laugh escaped her. If I knew that, Rhys, don't you think I would have fixed it? I am a stain on this pack. I feel it every day. Soon, your father will have had enough, and he will wipe that stain clean. His face tightened, the conflict within him clear as day. The elders, they are whispering. They're planning a rejection ceremony. Tonight, after the hunt. The world tilted. Alara's blood ran cold, freezing the very air in her lungs. Rejection. To be ritually severed from the pack bond, her scent erased, her existence renounced. For a werewolf, it was a fate worse than death. A lone wolf was vulnerable, packless, and lost. A half-wolf? She wouldn't survive a single night in the wilderness. Tonight? The word was a choked gasp. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. Rhys looked away, unable to meet her terrified gaze. He sees you as the source of all our misfortune. The thin herds, the early frost, he needs a scapegoat. A sacrifice to appease the spirits and unite the pack. He finally looked back at her, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, helpless anguish. I'm sorry, Alara. He turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving her alone with the crushing weight of his words. Tonight, her time had run out. The hunt wasn't just a hunt, it was the prelude to her execution. A strange calm began to settle over her terror. The cold certainty was somehow freeing. If this was her last night, she would not spend it cowering. She would face her fate under the gaze of the moon, the very goddess who had seemingly cursed her with this existence. She would meet her end with her head held high. Hours later, the entire Shadowfen pack was gathered in the main clearing, a sea of dark fur and hostile eyes, illuminated by the ethereal light of the full moon. The carcass of the great snow stag lay in the center, a testament to their strength. And kneeling before it was Alara. Alpha Borvin stood over her, his massive form blocking out the moon. His voice boomed, echoing with finality. For 18 seasons we have carried a blight, a weakness in our bloodline. We have shown patience, We have shown tolerance, but the moon goddess tests us no more. The poor hunts, the biting cold, they are signs of her displeasure. We have a curse among us. A guttural roar of agreement rose from the pack, a wave of animosity that washed over her, cold and sharp. She kept her chin high, her silver eyes fixed on the moon itself. She would not give them the satisfaction of her fear. She saw Reese in the crowd, his face pale, his gaze fixed firmly on the ground. He couldn't even look at her. This creature, Borvin thundered, pointing a thick finger at her, cannot answer the call of the moon. She cannot honor the spirit of the wolf. She is an empty vessel. A disgrace. She is nothing. He knelt, grabbing a ceremonial bowl filled with a dark, viscous mixture of mud and wolfsbane, a concoction designed to sever the pack bond and burn the one it touched. Tonight, we cleanse ourselves. We cut the diseased limb from the healthy body. Alara of the Shadowfen pack, for your failure, for your cursed blood, for the ill fortune you bring, I, Alpha Borvin, cast you out. He raised the bowl high, ready to pour its contents over her head. This was it, the end. Alara closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in a final, defiant act of peace. She would be free. But as the bowl began to tilt, a searing, electric heat bloomed on her left shoulder blade. It was not the heat of fire, but of pure, concentrated light. A gasp was torn from her lips, her eyes flying open. A brilliant, silver light erupted from her back, shining through the thin fabric of Reese's tunic. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched her frantic heartbeat, casting the entire clearing in an otherworldly, luminous glow. Alpha Borvin froze, the bowl slipping from his stunned fingers and shattering on the ground. The pack fell into a dead, shocked silence. The faint, crescent-shaped birthmark she had carried her entire life was now blazing like a shard of the moon itself, say. Ared into her skin. And then, a howl tore through the night. It was not a Shadowfen howl. It was deeper, older, and imbued with such immense, ancient power that the very ground trembled. It was the sound of absolute authority. It was the sound of a king. From the deepest shadows at the edge of the clearing, 3 figures emerged. They moved with a predatory grace that made the Shadowfen warriors look like clumsy children. The man in the lead was tall and imposing, with an aura of power that made Alpha Borvin seem small. His hair was the color of a starless midnight, and his eyes held the cold, ancient fire of distant stars. He was flanked by a stern-faced warrior and a woman with silver hair braided with charms of bone and stone. Alpha Borvin stumbled back, his face a mask of pure, undiluted terror. He knew. Every Alpha in the known world knew of him. Kale, the Alpha King. King Kale's piercing gaze swept over the scene, the terrified Alpha, the stunned pack, the stag, and finally, the girl on her knees, a beacon of impossible silver light. His eyes narrowed, locking onto the glowing mark on her shoulder. A flicker of something profound, disbelief, awe, triumph, crossed his features. He ignored Borvin completely. He walked toward Alara, his steps silent and deliberate. The sea of Shadowfen wolves parted before him without a sound. He knelt before her, his presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. He was so close she could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes. "Show me," he commanded, his voice a low, resonant rumble that was both a request and an unbreakable order. Trembling, Alara reached back and pulled the collar of the tunic aside, fully exposing the mark. It was a perfect, intricate crescent moon, etched into her skin as if by a divine hand, pulsing with a soft, living light. Kale reached out, his fingers tracing the air just above the mark. A jolt of energy, like static, leapt between them. He drew his hand back, his expression unreadable. Then he rose to his full height and turned his glacial gaze upon the trembling Alpha Borvin. "You were in the middle of a rejection ceremony," Kale stated, his voice dangerously calm. "For this girl." Borvin swallowed hard, his bravado utterly shattered. "Your Majesty, King Kale, we did not know. She is flawed. A curse." "A curse?" Kale's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "You stand under the eye of the goddess herself, and you call her chosen one a curse?" He gestured to Alara, his voice rising to a thunderous declaration that vibrated in every soul present. You blind fool. This is the mark of the moon. A sign not seen for 1,000 years. It marks the one who carries the blood of the first Luna, a destiny of power you cannot even comprehend. He turned back to Alara, and for the first time, she saw a look of profound, soul-deep reverence in his eyes. You were about to cast out your salvation, the Alpha King said, his words a chilling condemnation aimed at the entire pack. You were about to destroy your only hope. Chapter 2. The King's Claim. The silence in the clearing was absolute, so profound you could hear the frantic beating of every heart, the shallow rasp of every terrified breath. The Alpha King's words hung in the air, not just as sound, but as a physical weight, pressing down on the Shadowfen pack, shattering their reality. Their curse was the moon's chosen. Their shame was their salvation. The very foundations of their world crumbled into dust. Alara remained on her knees, the searing warmth from her mark a stark contrast to the icy shock that had frozen her limbs. She stared up at King Kale, her mind reeling, unable to process the enormity of what he had just declared. The mark of the moon. The blood of the first Luna. The words were like fragments of a forgotten dream, beautiful and utterly incomprehensible. All her life, she had been taught she was broken, a mistake. Now, this king, this living legend, was looking at her as if she were the most precious, powerful thing he had ever seen. Alpha Borvin was a broken man. The arrogance and cruelty had drained from his face, leaving behind the pallor of sheer, unadulterated terror. He took a stumbling step backward, his hands trembling. Your Majesty, we are your most humble servants. Had we known, the goddess did not show us. The goddess showed you everything. Kale's voice cracked through the clearing like a whip, his patience clearly at its end. She placed her sigil upon this girl's skin. You saw only what your own pride and fear allowed you to see. You saw a flaw where there was a blessing. Your ignorance is not an excuse, Borvin. It is a condemnation. He turned his back on the Alpha, a gesture of such profound dismissal it was more insulting than any physical blow. His attention returned to Alara. The intensity in his gaze was overwhelming, but for the first time, it did not make her feel small. It made her feel seen. Truly seen. He extended his hand to her. It was a warrior's hand, large and calloused, yet his gesture was devoid of any demand. It was an offer, a choice. Come, he said, his voice softening, though it still held the resonance of command. You have knelt before those unworthy long enough. Alara's breath hitched. Her eyes darted from his face to his outstretched hand, then to the stunned, fearful faces of the pack. She saw Reese. His gaze was locked on her, his expression a tortured canvas of shock, regret, and a dawning, horrifying understanding. He had thrown away a diamond, believing it to be glass. The loss in his eyes was absolute. A spark of something new, something fierce and long suppressed, ignited in Alara's chest. It was not just acceptance of the king's hand, it was a rejection of everything she was leaving behind. Slowly, her trembling lessened. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, she placed her small, pale hand into his. The moment their skin touched, it happened again. Not a painful jolt, but a surge of warm, golden energy that flowed up her arm and spread through her entire body. It felt like coming home after a lifetime in the cold. It felt like the first ray of sunlight after an endless winter. It was a feeling of rightness, of protection, of a bond clicking into place that was older than both of them. Kale's fingers closed gently around hers, and he easily drew her to her feet. He did not release her hand. Instead, he turned, standing beside her as her shield, her anchor, facing the pack that had cast her out. This girl is now under my protection, he announced, his voice ringing with a finality that brooked no argument. Her life, her safety, her future are my sacred charge. From this moment, an insult to her is an insult to the crown. A threat to her is a declaration of war against the Silver Citadel and all who swear fealty to it. He paused, his dark eyes sweeping over the cowed wolves. She leaves with me now. A strangled sound escaped Alpha Borvin. Desperation gave him a fleeting courage. But your Majesty, she is of Shadowfen blood. She is our responsibility. Allow us to atone. We will build her a lodge of honor. We will give her the finest of everything. She will want for nothing. Kale's head turned slowly, his gaze landing on Borvin like a physical weight. You had 18 years to honor her, he said, each word dripping with icy contempt. You chose to break her instead. You have proven yourselves unworthy of her presence. The bond is severed, not by my word, but by your own cruelty. She is packless no longer. He looked down at Alara, and his expression shifted once more, the harshness melting into something that looked almost like reverence. She will come with me to the Silver Citadel. She will join the ranks of the Luna Guard. This time, the gasps that rippled through the Shadowfen pack were filled with a different kind of awe. The Luna Guard. It was not just a pack, it was a myth. The king's personal retinue, the most elite warriors, seers, and healers from across all the territories. To be invited was the highest honor imaginable. And he was offering it to the half-wolf. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. Alara felt a dizzying wave of disbelief. Her? In the Luna Guard? The girl who couldn't complete a shift. It was absurd. It was terrifying. Yet, standing there with her hand in the king's, feeling the steady, powerful thrum of High's presence, for the first time, the terror was edged with a fragile, blooming hope. Kale began to lead her away from the center of the clearing, toward the dark tree line where his companions waited. His beta, the stern-faced warrior, and the silver-haired wise woman fell into step behind them, forming an impenetrable guard. The Shadowfen pack could only watch, paralyzed, as their rejected outcast was led away by a king. As they reached the edge of the woods, Alara risked one last glance over her shoulder. Rhys had pushed his way to the front of the crowd. Their eyes met across the moonlit space. His were filled with a raw, gut-wrenching anguish. He opened his mouth as if to call out, to say her name, to beg for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or just a moment of acknowledgement. But no sound came out. The chasm between them was now too wide, too deep, bridged by a destiny he could never touch. Alara turned her face forward, toward the unknown path ahead. A single, hot tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. It was not a tear for him, or for the pack, or for the life she was leaving. It was a tear for the girl she had been, the lonely, broken girl who had believed their lies. That girl was gone. Who would emerge from the shadows of these ancient trees, she did not know. The journey into the deep woods was swift and silent. The king and his guards moved with an effortless, predatory grace that made the forest itself seem to part for them. Alara, still barefoot and clad only in Rhys's borrowed tunic, struggled to keep pace, her muscles aching, her mind a whirlwind. Yet, Kale seemed acutely aware of her. He never tugged or hurried her. His grip on her hand was firm but patient, a steadying presence as she navigated the unfamiliar, root-strewn ground. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, they arrived at a small, hidden encampment nestled in a sheltered hollow. A low fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the faces of several other warriors, all of whom bore the same silver crescent moon emblem on their armor. As one, they rose to their feet, their postures straightening in respect as their king approached. The silver-haired woman stepped forward, her kind, intelligent eyes immediately finding Alara. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice a soft, melodic contrast to the tension of the night. "Can it be true? After all this time?" Kale finally released Alara's hand, though he remained close, a protective wall at her side. "It is, Lyra. The goddess has answered our prayers. This is Alara." Lyra's face broke into a warm, genuine smile. She moved forward and, to Alara's surprise, took both of her hands in her own. Her touch was cool and gentle. "Welcome, child," she said, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "We have waited so very long for you." The stern beta gave a curt, respectful nod. "Liam," Kale said, gesturing to him. "My beta and first blade." Liam's nod was sharp, his eyes assessing but not unkind. "A safe journey is our priority," he stated, his voice a low gravelly rumble. Alara could only manage a small, shaky nod in return. The whiplash of the evening was too much. From the brink of a horrific death to this reverence. She felt like a fragile sapling suddenly transplanted to a foreign soil, unsure if it would thrive or wither. She is exhausted, Kale said, his observant eyes missing nothing. We leave for the citadel at first light. For now, she needs rest, warmth, and food. A thick, fur-lined cloak was immediately brought and draped over her shoulders. The weight of it was immense, but it chased away the deep-seated chill that had been her constant companion for years. Someone pressed a waterskin and a wrapped parcel of food into her hands, travel bread and strips of smoked meat. She ate and drank mechanically, the flavors barely registering. Kale led her to a place near the fire, away from the main activity of the camp. He sat beside her, not speaking, simply offering his silent, solid presence. She stared into the flames, watching the logs crackle and spit, trying to make sense of the shattered pieces of her life. "The mark," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it mean, truly?" Kale was silent for a long moment, his own gaze fixed on the fire. "It means that everything you have ever been told about yourself is a lie," he said finally, his voice low and intent. "It means that the pain you feel is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to a power lying dormant within you, a power so vast your body never knew how to contain it." The Shadowfen tried to force a shift through rage and dominance. "For you, that is like trying to light a star with a match. It will never work. Your power is born of harmony, of spirit, of a deep and sacred connection to the moon itself." Alara listened, her heart pounding. It was the opposite of everything she had ever known. "The first Luna?" "Celine," Kale supplied, the name spoken with such reverence it was like a prayer. "The first of our kind, it is said." She did not just shift into a wolf, she became one with the moonlight. She was a creature of pure spirit, a healer, a guide. Her howl could calm a raging storm, and her touch could mend a shattered soul. Her bloodline was thought to be lost, extinguished by time and war. The mark is the sign of its return. Prophecy foretells that the one who bears it will unite the packs against a great darkness and restore the balance we have lost. The weight of his words settled on her, heavier than any fur cloak. Unite the packs? Restore balance? She was just Alara. She couldn't even control her own body. I cannot do those things," she whispered, a tremor of fear in her voice. "I am no one." Kale turned to look at her then, his dark eyes capturing the firelight. "You are someone to me," he said, his voice filled with an unshakable conviction. "You are the hope I have searched for across centuries. You are the answer to a question my people have been asking for 1,000 years. Do not believe the shadows they painted you with, Alara. Your light is the only thing that can chase them away." He did not touch her again, but his words wrapped around her like a shield. For the first time in her life, someone saw strength in her where others saw only failure. For the first time, the frantic, pained whimper of her inner wolf was met not with scorn, but with a promise of understanding. As she lay down later, wrapped in the warm furs, listening to the quiet sounds of the royal camp around her, she looked up at the moon through the canopy of leaves. It was the same moon that had witnessed her humiliation, her pain, her rejection. But tonight, it looked different. It felt like it was looking back at her, not with cold indifference, but with a gentle, loving gaze. The mark on her shoulder pulsed softly, a comforting, rhythmic beat in the darkness. Her old life was over. The outcast was gone. But as she closed her eyes, the fear was no longer the only thing she felt. There, in the deepest part of her soul, a tiny, brave ember of curiosity began to glow. What if the king was right? What if she wasn't broken? What if she was simply waiting? The journey to the Silver Citadel would be the first step toward finding out. And as sleep finally claimed her, the last thing she felt was not dread, but the faint, thrilling whisper of a destiny yet to be born. Chapter 3. The Road to the Citadel. The first light of dawn was a pale, hesitant smear on the horizon when the camp stirred to life. Alara awoke not to the familiar sounds of dismissive snarls and scornful laughter, but to the quiet, efficient movements of the Luna Guard. There was no shouting, only low, murmured commands and the soft rustle of gear being packed. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the lingering smoke of the dying fire, but it was clean, devoid of the oppressive weight of hatred she had known all her life. She sat up, the heavy furs pooling around her waist. The events of the previous night rushed back, not as a terrifying dream, but as a stunning, irrevocable reality. The mark on her shoulder was quiet now, its light dormant, but she could still feel its presence like a warm ember nestled against her skin. A constant, silent reminder that her world had been turned inside out. King Kale was already standing near the ashes of the fire, speaking quietly with Liam. He moved with a predator's grace even in stillness, a king in both name and bearing. As if sensing her gaze, he turned his head. His dark eyes met hers, and he gave a slow, slight nod. It was not a smile, but it was an acknowledgement, a silent check-in that made her feel seen and accounted for. It was a novel feeling. Lyra approached her, a bundle of cloth in her hands. "Good morning, child," she said, her voice as gentle as the dawn light. "I thought you might like something more suitable to wear for the journey." She held out a soft, gray tunic and a pair of sturdy leather trousers. They were simple, but the material was of a fine, durable quality Alara had never been allowed to touch. "Thank you," Alara murmured, her fingers tracing the soft weave. It was a small kindness, but after a lifetime of deprivation, it felt immense. She changed quickly behind a screen of thick bushes, the new clothes fitting her far better than the cast-off rags of the Shadowfen ever had. As she pulled the tunic over her head, she caught another scent on the fabric, not pine and aggression, but something cleaner, like sunlight on stone and crisp mountain air. The scent of the Silver Citadel. The scent of her new life. The journey began as the sun finally broke above the trees. They moved with a swift, ground-eating pace that was both exhilarating and exhausting. Kale set a demanding tempo, but Alara noticed he frequently adjusted it, his sharp eyes missing nothing. When her breath began to come in ragged gasps, he would raise a hand, calling for a brief halt to check a trail or allow the scouts to range ahead. He never singled her out, never shamed her, but his unspoken care was a protective shield around her. They traveled for days, leaving the dense, shadowy territory of the Shadowfen far behind. The landscape began to change, the earth rising into rolling foothills dotted with hardy, wind-bent trees. The air grew sharper, thinner, carrying the promise of high mountains. For Alara, who had never seen beyond the borders of her pack's dark forests, it was like stepping into a legend. She saw vast, open skies for the first time, watched eagles circle on thermal currents, and drank from icy streams that tasted of snow and granite. The members of the Luna Guard were a constant, silent presence. They were a diverse group, men and women with eyes that held the wisdom of countless battles and journeys. They treated her with a quiet, unwavering respect that was both comforting and unnerving. They did not speak to her unless necessary, but their watchful eyes were always on her, their bodies subtly positioned to form a protective perimeter around her and the king. Liam, the beta, was like a carved statue given life. He spoke rarely, and his commands were delivered in a low, gravelly tone that brooked no argument. He was the practical arm of the king's authority, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, his hand never far from the hilt of the sword strapped to his back. It was Lyra who became Alara's anchor. The wise woman would often fall into step beside her during the less strenuous parts of their trek, her presence a calming influence. "The citadel," Lyra said one afternoon, pointing toward the jagged, snow-capped peaks that had been growing steadily larger on the horizon for days. "It has stood for longer than any living wolf can remember. Built into the very bones of the mountain, a testament to our people's strength and resilience." "It sounds immense," Alara replied, her voice small. "It is a home, child," Lyra said gently. "It is safety. It is knowledge. The Great Library holds the Luna Chronicles, the collected history and wisdom of our people, from the time of the first Luna herself. It is all there for you to learn." The Luna Chronicles. The very name sent a shiver of both anticipation and fear down Alara's spine. To learn her own history, a history that had been stolen from her, it was a daunting prospect. Her interactions with King Kale were the most confusing and electrifying part of the journey. He was often deep in conversation with Liam or scouting ahead, a king with the weight of a nation on his shoulders. Yet, in the quiet moments, he would seek her out. On the third evening, as they made camp in a high meadow overlooking a vast, starlit valley, he came and sat beside her, handing her a bowl of rich stew. "The air is different here," she said softly, if only to break the silence. "It doesn't feel heavy." "That is because you are no longer breathing air poisoned by fear and malice," Kale replied, his gaze on the distant stars. "A pack's spirit imprints itself on its territory. The Shadowfen land reeks of aggression and insecurity. Here," he took a deep breath. "Here, the air is clean. It holds the scent of loyalty, of history, of duty." "Did you always know?" she asked, the question that had been burning inside her finally spilling out. "Did you always know you would find me?" Kale was silent for a long moment. "I knew the prophecies," he said carefully. "I have spent my life searching for any sign, any whisper of the mark's return. For decades, there was nothing. Many began to believe the line was truly lost. But I could not give up. The darkness that the prophecies speak of is not a myth, Alara. It is a real, gathering threat. We have faced skirmishes with corrupted wolves, cultists who worship a power that seeks to devour the moon itself. We needed a hope. We needed you." His words were a heavy mantle settling on her shoulders. "What if I am not the hope you need? What if I cannot learn to control this power?" He turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his eyes was breathtaking. "You will," he said with absolute conviction. "Because you have already survived the worst this world could throw at you. The pain of your shifts, the cruelty of your pack, that was your forge. It tempered a spirit of incredible resilience inside you. You do not see it yet, but I do. I see the strength in the way you hold your head high even when you are afraid. I see the courage in your eyes right now, as you face a future that would terrify anyone else." His faith in her was like a physical force, a wall at her back she had never known she needed. She looked away, her cheeks warming, unsure how to process such unwavering belief. The next day, they entered the high passes leading to the citadel. The terrain became steeper, the path winding along narrow cliff edges with dizzying drops. Alara's muscles screamed in protest, but she gritted her teeth and pushed on, determined not to be a burden. More than once, a strong, steadying hand from Liam or a silently offered waterskin from one of the other guards helped her over a particularly difficult stretch. It was during one of these difficult climbs that it happened. A loose stone gave way under her foot. With a gasp, she lost her balance, stumbling toward the edge of the path. Terror lanced through her, but before she could fall, a powerful arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back firmly against a solid, unyielding chest. "Kale." He held her for a moment, just long enough for her to find her footing, for her heart to stop trying to beat its way out of her ribs. The heat of him seeped through her clothes, and the scent of him, sunlight and stone and kingly power, filled her senses. Steady, his voice rumbled by her ear, a low vibration that she felt more than heard. He released her as soon as she was stable, his touch brief and impersonal, yet it left a brand on her skin. "Watch your step. The path is treacherous here." She could only nod, her voice lost somewhere in her throat. The simple, protective act had shaken her more than the near fall. It was so different from the harsh shoves and deliberate trips of the Shadowfen. This was care. This was what it felt like to be valued. As they crested the final pass, Liam, who was walking ahead, stopped and pointed. The Silver Citadel. Alara's breath caught. Nestled in a colossal mountain cradle, veiled by mist and waterfalls, was a city of pure white stone that seemed to have been grown from the mountain itself, not built. Towers spiraled towards the sky, graceful and impossibly tall, connected by bridges that looked like strands of silver thread. A massive wall, inlaid with veins of actual silver that caught the afternoon light, encircled the entire valley. At its heart, built into the sheer cliff face, was the citadel proper, a fortress of breathtaking beauty and imposing strength. It was a place of myth and power, and it was to be her home. A wave of overwhelming emotion crashed over her, awe, terror, and a desperate, fragile hope. This was the end of her journey from the shadows, and the beginning of something she could not yet name. King Kale came to stand beside her, his gaze also fixed on the magnificent sight. "Welcome home, Alara," he said, his voice quiet but filled with a profound significance. Tears she could no longer hold back welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a relief so deep it shook her to her core. She was home. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Mountain. The descent into the valley felt like walking into a dream. The air grew warmer, carrying the scent of blooming night-blooming flowers and clean, running water. As they approached the colossal silver-inlaid gates, they swung open without a sound, operated by some unseen mechanism. The guards stationed there, clad in polished silver armor, dropped to one knee as King Kale passed, their fists pressed to their hearts in a salute of absolute fealty. Their eyes, however, flickered to Alara, filled not with judgment, but with a burning, reverent curiosity. The city within the walls was a marvel of harmony and engineering. Streets paved with smooth white stone spiraled upwards, lined with buildings carved from the same mountain rock. Water channels flowed alongside the roads, their water crystal clear and filled with shimmering, silver-scaled fish. Werewolves moved about their daily lives, traders, artisans, warriors, children, and all paused to bow their heads as their king walked by. The atmosphere was one of peace, order, and immense, quiet power. It was the polar opposite of the chaotic, aggressive Shadowfen settlement. Alara walked beside Kale, feeling like a ghost in a world of vibrant color. She was acutely aware of her own raggedness, of the borrowed clothes, of the sheer foreignness of her presence in this perfect place. But no one sneered, no one whispered. The respect shown to the king extended to her, simply by virtue of being at his side. They climbed ever upward, through the city tiers, toward the citadel itself. The fortress loomed larger with every step, its sheer scale making her feel infinitesimally small. They passed through another set of gates, these ones forged of gleaming silver and dark, ancient ironwood, and entered the main keep. The interior was cool and quiet, the air smelling of old stone, parchment, and beeswax. Sunlight streamed through high, arched windows, illuminating vast halls adorned with tapestries that depicted the history of the werewolf people, the Blessee. Ing of the Moon Goddess, the reign of the First Luna, great battles against ancient evils, and the lineage of the Alpha Kings. Her eyes were drawn to one particularly large tapestry showing a magnificent she-wolf woven from threads of pure silver, her howl summoning a cascade of moonlight to heal a wounded land. The First Luna, her ancestor. Kale led her away from the main thoroughfares, down a quieter corridor. He stopped before a set of double doors made of the same ironwood as the gates, carved with an intricate scene of the moon in all its phases. "These will be your chambers," he said, his voice echoing softly in the hall. "You will be safe here. No one will enter without your express permission. This is your sanctuary." He pushed the doors open. Alara stepped over the threshold and felt her breath leave her body in a soft gasp. The room was larger than the entire longhouse she had shared with the Shadowfen Omegas. A vast bed piled with furs and silken cushions dominated one wall. A fireplace large enough to stand in was set into another, a cheerful fire already crackling within, warding off the mountain chill. But it was the far wall that captivated her. It was not a wall at all, but a series of arched openings leading to a private balcony that overlooked the entire valley. The view was staggering. The city spread out below like a model, the waterfalls cascading down the cliffs, the endless expanse of sky. "It's too much," she whispered, her voice trembling. She had never had a space to call her own, let alone one of such breathtaking beauty. "It is what you are owed," Kale stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He walked into the room, his presence making the spacious chamber feel suddenly intimate. He gestured to a heavy wooden table near the fire, upon which sat a large, leather-bound book. Its cover was tooled with a silver crescent moon, identical to the mark on her shoulder. "That is the Luna Chronicles," he said. "It contains the history of our people, and the story of Selene, the first Luna. Lyra will help you study it. It is vital that you understand your past before you can embrace your future." Alara approached the book as one might approach a sleeping dragon, with a mixture of awe and terror. Her fingers, slightly trembling, traced the embossed symbol. It felt familiar, like the echo of a memory from a life she never lived. This first Luna? Celine, she began, looking back at Kale. What was she truly like? Kale's gaze grew distant, as if looking into the depths of time itself. The chronicles say she was compassion incarnate. She did not just shift into a wolf, she became one with the very spirit of the moon. Her power was not one of domination, but of harmony. She could heal the sick with a touch, command the growth of forests with a song, and her howl could soothe the most savage heart. It is said that in her presence, no violence could exist. He looked back at her, his dark eyes intense. That is the legacy that flows in your veins, Alara. The pain you feel when you shift is not because you are weak. It is because your body is a vessel struggling to contain an ocean of power it was never taught how to hold. A fragile flicker of understanding began to dawn. All her life, she had been trying to force her shift, to make it happen through sheer will and pain, just like the Shadowfen did. But what if her power required a different key? What if it required not force, but surrender? Can you teach me? The question was out before she could stop it, a small, hopeful plea. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Kale's lips. It transformed his stern, regal face, making him seem younger, more approachable. I will, he said. But the path will not be easy. You will have to unlearn a lifetime of shame and fear. You will have to be stronger than you have ever been. I am stronger than you think, Alara replied, and to her own surprise, she meant it. A spark of the defiance that had kept her alive in the Shadowfen marshes now ignited into a flame of determination. I survived them. His smile widened a fraction. Yes, he said, his voice soft. You did. He grew serious again. Rest now. Wash away the dust of your old life. Tomorrow, your training begins. Lyra will bring you new clothes and anything else you require. He turned to leave but paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He did not look back. Alara, he said, his voice low and resonant in the quiet room. What my people did to you, the ignorance they showed. I will spend the rest of my days making amends for it. You have my word. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her alone in the magnificent silence. Alara stood there for a long time, the king's promise echoing around her. She walked out onto the balcony, the stone cold beneath her bare feet. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the distant roar of the waterfalls. She looked down at the city, at the tiny, bustling lives below, and then up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to prick the deepening blue. For the first time, she felt the whisper of her inner wolf not as a source of pain or shame, but as a murmur of anticipation. It was no longer a frantic, caged thing, but a presence waiting patiently to be understood. Here, in this fortress of stone and starlight, surrounded by a king's protection and the promise of a history she could finally claim, the ember of hope within her burst into a steady, determined flame. She was not broken. She was a seed that had been planted in barren soil, and now, she had been transplanted to a place where she could finally grow. Later, after she had washed in the surprisingly modern bathing chamber attached to her room, a soft knock came at the door. It was Lyra, her arms laden with soft, beautifully made garments in shades of silver, gray, and pale blue. There were also brushes for her hair, and a tray of food, fresh fruit, cheese, and warm bread. As Lyra helped her into a dress of flowing silver-gray linen, Alara felt another layer of her old self slough away. The fabric was soft against her skin, and it fit her perfectly. You look like one of us now, child, Lyra said, her eyes warm. You look like who you were always meant to be. That night, as Alara lay in the impossibly comfortable bed, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling, she made a promise to herself. She would learn. She would study the chronicles. She would master whatever power lay within her. She would become worthy of the faith the king had placed in her. She would not let her fear rule her anymore. The journey from the shadows was over. Now, the real work was about to begin. And as she drifted into the first truly peaceful sleep of her life, the mark on her shoulder pulsed once, gently, as if in agreement. Chapter 5. The First Lesson. The morning sun had not yet crested the mountain peaks when a soft knock echoed through Alara's chambers. She was already awake, having spent the hours before dawn staring at the tapestry of the first luna, her mind racing with a chaotic mix of anticipation and dread. The knock was Lyra, her serene presence a calming balm in the tense quiet. "King Kale awaits you in the high meadow," Lyra said, her voice gentle. "It is time for your first lesson." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She dressed quickly in the soft, practical clothes Lyra had brought, her fingers fumbling with the fastenings. She followed the wise woman through the silent, sleeping citadel, their footsteps the only sound in the grand, echoing hallways. They passed through a secluded archway and onto a path that wound up the mountain behind the fortress, away from the city below. The high meadow was a hidden paradise, a bowl of emerald green nestled between towering peaks. A crystal-clear lake, its surface as smooth as glass, reflected the pale pink of the morning sky. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and the air was so pure it felt like drinking light. And in the center of it all stood Kale. He was not in his royal armor, but in simple, dark trousers and a tunic, his powerful frame looking no less imposing for its simplicity. He stood with his back to her, looking out over the lake, a king communing with his domain. He turned as she approached, his dark eyes missing nothing. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremble in her hands. He feared she tried so hard to mask behind a facade of determination. "You're training with the Shadowfen," he began without preamble, his voice calm and steady. "They taught you to force the shift. To claw your way into your wolf form through pain and rage. They were trying to light a star with a match." Alara blinked, the analogy striking a deep, resonant chord within her. It was exactly what it had always felt like, a futile, painful struggle against an impossible force. "Your power is not of that nature," Kale continued, walking toward her. "It is not born of fire and fury. It is born of stillness, of connection. Your strength comes from the moon, from the earth, from the very spirit of life that flows through this world. To access it, you must not fight. You must listen." He gestured for her to sit on the soft grass facing the lake. "Close your eyes, Alara. I do not want you to try to shift. I want you to simply feel." Hesitantly, she complied. The grass was cool and damp beneath her. She could feel the warmth of the rising sun on her face. "Block out the fear. Block out the memories of their voices." Kale's voice was a low, guiding rumble. "Reach out with your senses, not to dominate, but to understand. Feel the life in the soil beneath you. The network of roots, the burrow of the sleeping vole, the patient journey of the earthworm. Feel the energy in the sunlight as it touches your skin. The warmth is not just heat, it is life given form." It was impossibly difficult. Her mind was a storm of 18 years of trauma. The sneering face of Alpha Borvin, the cold disappointment in Reese's eyes, the sting of every rock thrown, every cruel word hissed. Flawed, broken, half-wolf, a tear escaped from beneath her closed eyelid, tracing a hot path down her cheek. "I can't," she whispered, her voice thick with frustration. "They are too loud. The past is too loud." Kale did not chastise her. He simply moved closer, his presence a solid, calming weight beside her. "You cannot silence the past, Alara. But you can choose which voice to give your power to. They called you weak because they feared a strength they could not comprehend. That fear is their chain. Do not let it become yours. Your pain has forged in you a resilience that none of my warriors possess. That resilience is your anchor. Use it, hold onto it." His words were not empty comfort. They were a strategy. He was not asking her to forget her pain, but to repurpose it. To use the very hardships that had shaped her as a foundation for her strength. She took a deep, shuddering breath, focusing on the feeling of the air filling her lungs. She let the memory of the pain wash over her, but instead of drowning in it, she imagined it as a stone, a heavy, unyielding stone that anchored her to the earth. As still here. She had survived. Slowly, painstakingly, she tried again. She pushed past the echoing voices and reached out. At first, there was nothing but the frantic beat of her own heart. But then, a flicker. A faint, thrumming sensation deep in the earth, a slow, patient pulse. The heartbeat of the mountain. She felt the delicate structure of a spider's web strung between two blades of grass, sensed the tiny life waiting at its center. She felt the water in the lake, not as a still surface, but as a body teeming with microscopic life, its energy cool and flowing. And as she did, the frantic, pained energy of her inner wolf began to calm. It was no longer clawing at the bars of its cage. It was listening. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in this new, vast world of sensation. When she finally opened her eyes, the sun was higher in the sky, and the meadow was bathed in golden light. She felt drained, but it was a clean exhaustion, not the shattered feeling that followed a failed shift. Kale was watching her, his expression unreadable. "What did you feel?" "The mountain," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "It breathes. And the water, it sings." A look of profound satisfaction crossed his features. "Good. That is the first step. The first word in a language you were born to speak." For the next several days, their routine was the same. Before dawn, they would go to the meadow. There were no dramatic transformations, no bursts of power. There was only the patient, grueling work of relearning how to be in the world. Kale taught her to meditate, to find the quiet center within the storm of her own mind. He taught her to identify the different energies around her, the solid, grounding force of the earth, the fluid, adaptable nature of water, the vibrant, growing energy of the plants. Lyra continued her lessons in the afternoons, seated with her in the vast Citadel library. The Luna Chronicles were not a single book, but a collection of scrolls and tombs, their pages filled with history, poetry, and complex theories of lunar magic. "The mark is a conduit," Lyra explained, unrolling a delicate scroll that depicted the human body with lines of silver energy flowing from a crescent moon on the shoulder. "It draws power directly from the moon, but your body and spirit are the channel through which it flows." The Shadowfen method of forcing a shift was like trying to pour an ocean through a cracked cup. "It shattered you. We must teach you how to become the ocean itself." Alara learned about Selene, not as a distant goddess, but as a being who had walked the same earth. She learned of her compassion, her wisdom, her deep, abiding love for all living things. It was a far cry from the brutal, survival of the fittest doctrine of the Shadowfen. Evening, a week into her training, she was in her chambers, attempting to meditate on her balcony. She was focusing on the feeling of the starlight on her skin, trying to distinguish its cool, silver energy from the warm, golden memory of the sun. It was subtle, elusive. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The world tilted, and a vision, sharp and terrifying, flashed behind her eyes. Darkness. A red, bloated moon. The scent of blood and rotting earth. Snarling faces with eyes of burning crimson. A shadowy figure, tall and gaunt, reaching out a skeletal hand toward her, its voice a dry rustle in her mind. "The vessel, she is found." She gasped, stumbling back from the balcony's edge, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving behind a cold, greasy fear that coiled in her stomach. Shaken to her core, she didn't hesitate. She fled her chambers and ran through the corridors, not stopping until she stood before the heavy doors of the king's private study. A guard stood outside, but upon seeing her pale, frantic face, he simply nodded and opened the door for her. Kale was seated at a large desk, studying a map. He looked up as she burst in, his eyes immediately sharpening with alarm. "Alara? What is it?" I saw something," she choked out, wrapping her arms around herself. "A vision. A red moon. Wolves with red eyes. And a shadow. It called me a vessel." All the color drained from Kale's face. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the stone floor. "The Blood Moon Cult," he said, his voice grim. "And their master." He came around the desk, his expression deadly serious. "This is the darkness the prophecy speaks of, Alara. They seek to devour the moon's light, to plunge the world into an eternal night of chaos. And they know you are the key to stopping them. Your power is a threat to them. This vision, it means they are searching for you." The comfortable world of her lessons and meditation shattered in an instant. This was no longer just about learning to control her power for her own sake. It was about a coming war. The fear was back, colder and sharper than ever. Kale saw it in her eyes. He did not reach for her, but he took a step closer, his gaze holding hers with an almost physical force. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "They may be searching, but they will not find you here. The Silver Citadel is the safest place in this world. And you are not alone in this fight. You have me. You have the entire Luna Guard. Your power is our hope, but my strength is your shield. I will let no harm come to you. I swear it on my life, and on my crown." His vow was like a fortress wall slamming down around her. The terror did not vanish, but it met its match in the unshakable certainty of his promise. She was not the scared Shadowfen outcast anymore. She was Alara, the moon-marked, under the protection of the Alpha King. And as she looked into his eyes, seeing the fierce, protective fire burning within them, she felt a new kind of strength stir in her soul. The strength that comes from knowing you are not fighting your battles alone. Chapter 6. Whispers of War. The peace of the High Meadow was forever tainted. Where Alara had once felt the serene pulse of the mountain, she now sensed a lurking unease, a subtle wrongness in the air that mirrored the cold dread coiled in her stomach. The vision of the red moon and the gaunt, shadowy figure was a stain on her mind, a constant, whispering reminder that her sanctuary was under threat. Kale's demeanor shifted palpably. The patient teacher was now the vigilant warlord. Their morning sessions continued, but the focus sharpened. It was no longer just about feeling the Earth's pulse, it was about sensing the first tremor of an approaching enemy. "The cultist's power is a corruption," Kale explained, his voice a low growl as they stood by the lake. "It feels like a tear in the world, a void that sucks in light and life. I need you to learn its signature. I need you to be able to sense it from a mile away." He had Liam and other members of the Luna Guard simulate the feeling, not the full corruption, but a suppressed, aggressive aura that felt sharp and acidic compared to the natural energies she was learning to recognize. At first, the simulated presence made her nauseous, a primal revulsion that sent her wolf cowering. But Kale was relentless. "Do not flinch from it," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "Know your enemy. Understand its scent, its taste in the air. Fear of the unknown will get you killed. Knowledge of your foe will keep you alive." So, she learned to stand her ground. She learned to let the hostile energy wash over her without breaking, to analyze it, to find its edges and its weaknesses. It was a brutal, exhausting process, but with each session, her resilience grew. The scared girl from the marshes was being forged into something harder, sharper. Her afternoons with Lyra took on a new urgency as well. The Luna Chronicles were no longer just a history lesson, they were a tactical manual. Lyra pored over ancient texts detailing the Blood Moon cult's first appearance centuries ago, their twisted rituals, and their fanatical belief that by devouring the moon goddess's power, they would achieve a form of dark immortality. "The one you saw, the shadowy figure, is known only as the Corruptor," Lyra said, her finger tracing a faded illustration of a faceless being shrouded in darkness. "No one knows his true origin. He is ancient, a being of pure hatred that feeds on chaos. He cannot be killed by conventional means. The prophecies state that only the pure light of the moon-marked can unravel his form and banish his essence from this world." The weight of it was crushing. Unravel his form, banish his essence. The words were too vast, too divine for someone who still struggled to meditate without her mind wandering. "How?" Alara whispered, her hands trembling as she looked down at the ancient, terrifying drawing. "Lyra, I can't even shift without pain. How can I possibly stand against something like that?" Lyra placed a gentle, wrinkled hand over hers. "You are looking at the mountain peak from the base, child. You see only the impossible height, not the path that leads there." Celine herself was not born with a howl that could shake the heavens. She learned, she grew, she stumbled. You are on the same path. Trust it, and trust the king. His faith in you is not blind. He sees the warrior you are becoming, even when you cannot. Meanwhile, the citadel itself was transforming. The peaceful hum of daily life was now underscored by the grim rhythm of preparation. The forges beneath the mountain worked day and night, the clang of hammers on silver steel a constant anthem. Liam drilled the Luna Guard with a new intensity in the main courtyard, their formations shifting from ceremonial displays to ruthless combat maneuvers. Scouts came and went at all hours, their reports delivered directly to the king in hushed tones. Alara saw it all from her balcony, a silent witness to the storm gathering around her. She felt like the eye of a hurricane, a deceptive calm at the center of escalating chaos. The respect the citadel's inhabitants showed her was now tinged with a desperate hope. They looked at her not just as a curiosity, but as their only chance for survival. It was a burden heavier than any waterskin she had ever carried. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered the silent halls of the library. The moon was full, its light streaming through the high windows, painting silver pathways on the stone floor. She found herself drawn to the great tapestry of Selene. In the moonlight, the silver threads seemed to glow with an inner light, and the first Luna's eyes seemed to hold a deep, ancient sorrow. "Did you feel this way?" Alara thought, reaching out to touch the woven image. "Were you ever afraid? Did you ever doubt your path?" A presence behind her made her turn. Kale stood there, out of his armor, looking more like a weary man than an untouchable king. "I could not sleep," he said simply, his gaze moving from her to the tapestry. "The scouts have returned. The news is not good." Alara's heart clenched. "What is it?" "The corruption is spreading," he said, his voice tight. "A small, remote pack on the south. Earn borders has been wiped out. Not just killed, consumed. The land around them is blighted, the trees twisted, the water poisoned. It is the work of the cult. They are testing their strength, and growing bolder." He finally looked at her, and the raw worry in his eyes stole her breath. "They are moving this way. It is only a matter of time." The confirmation of her worst fears should have paralyzed her. But standing there in the moonlit silence, with the image of Selene at her back and the Alpha King bearing his vulnerability before her, something shifted inside Alara. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her gut, but it was now surrounded by a fierce, protective fury. These people, this citadel, Kale, they had given her a home. They had shown her kindness. They believed in her. She would not let the darkness take them. "Then we will be ready," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Kale studied her face, and she saw the surprise in his own, followed by a slow dawning pride. "We? You said I am not alone in this fight," she replied, holding his gaze. "The same is true for you. You carry the weight of this kingdom, but you do not have to carry it by yourself. My power may be the key, but your strength is the lock that holds the door. We will face this together." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other in the silent, silver-drenched library. The space between them seemed to crackle with a new understanding, a partnership forged in the fires of a shared threat. It was more intimate than any touch, more binding than any vow. Kale gave a single, slow nod, a world of meaning in the gesture. Together, he agreed, the word a solemn promise. The next morning, Alara went to the high meadow with a new resolve. When Kale instructed her to sense for the simulated corruption, she didn't just withstand it. She pushed back. She focused on the memory of the moon's pure light on her skin, of the mountain's steadfast pulse, of the king's unwavering faith, and she imagined that light flowing from her, creating a sphere of calm around her that the hostile energy could not penetrate. It was small, it was fragile, but it was a shield. And for the first time, she was not just learning to survive. She was learning to fight back. The path to the mountain peak was still long and shrouded in mist, but she had taken her first, deliberate step. The whispers of war were growing into a roar, and Alara, the once broken half-wolf, was finding her own voice to answer them. Chapter 7. The Echo of a Howl. The turning point came not with a roar, but with a whisper of wind through the high meadow's pines. Kale had been pushing her harder than ever, his patience worn thin by the grim reports from his scouts. The Blood Moon cult's shadow was lengthening, and Alara's progress, while steady, felt agonizingly slow against the tide of impending doom. Again, Kale commanded, his voice stripped of its usual calm. Liam, standing a few paces away, was radiating a controlled aggression so potent it made the air taste of metal. "Do not just block it. Push it out. Your light is not a wall, Alara, it is a tide. It must cleanse. Alara stood in the center of the clearing, sweat beading on her forehead. Her entire body trembled with the effort of maintaining the fragile shield of moonlight she had learned to visualize. Liam's simulated aura felt like a physical weight, pressing in on her, seeking a crack. She felt her concentration waver, the image of the silvery light flickering. The familiar, gut-wrenching fear of failure began to rise, thick and suffocating. They called you weak. They said you were a curse. The old voices, silenced for a time, now screamed in her mind. Her wolf whimpered, cowering deep within. She was going to fail. Again. But then, another voice cut through the noise. Not a memory, but a recent, living truth. Your pain has forged in you a resilience that none of my warriors possess. That is your anchor. Use it. Kale's words from her first lesson echoed, clear and strong. Her resilience. Not in spite of her pain, but because of it. She had endured. She had survived the Shadowfen. She had survived rejection. She had walked into the unknown. That was not weakness. That was a strength so profound her tormentors could never have understood it. In that moment of clarity, she stopped fighting the fear. She stopped trying to force the light. Instead, she let go. She opened herself completely, not to the hostile energy, but to the world around her. She felt the deep, unshakable bedrock beneath her feet, the patient strength of the mountains that had stood for eons. She felt the endless, boundless sky above, the domain of the moon that was her birthright. She felt the quiet, fierce loyalty of the king who stood beside her, a rock in the swirling chaos. And she reached for her wolf. Not with a command, not with a demand to shift, but with an invitation. A plea from one wounded soul to another. I am not your jailer, she whispered within. I am your home. We have been hurt, but we are not broken. Our strength is not his. She pictured Liam's aggressive aura. Our strength is this. She poured every memory of kindness, of starlight on the citadel walls, of Lyra's gentle touch, of Kale's unwavering faith into the thought. It is the mountain. It is the moon. It is us, together. Will you run with me? The response was not the painful, desperate clawing she was used to. It was a surge, a wave of pure, silver energy that erupted not from her muscles, but from the very core of her spirit. It flowed from the mark on her shoal. A river of liquid moonlight that poured through her veins. There was no tearing, no grinding, no agony. There was only a sense of rightness, of wholeness. When she opened her eyes, the world was different. It was sharper, clearer, painted in shades of silver and shadow she had never seen. The colors were more vibrant, the scents a complex symphony. She looked down and saw powerful paws, covered in a thick, luminous coat that shimmered with every breath. She was not a half-formed monster. She was a wolf, a silver wolf, woven from moonlight and starlight, elegant and fierce. A joy so profound it was painful erupted from her soul. It was a feeling of freedom, of finally being who she was always meant to be. She threw her head back, and a howl tore from her throat. It was not the aggressive, dominating cry of the Shadowfen. It was a melody, a song of release, of gratitude, of power. It was a sound that resonated with the hum of the mountain and the silent song of the stars. It was the echo of the first Luna's own voice. The effect was immediate. Liam, caught in the direct wave of the sound, stumbled back a step, his aggressive aura snuffed out like a candle. His eyes widened in shock, not at her form, but at the sheer, purifying quality of the sound. It didn't hurt him, but it unraveled the simulated corruption he projected completely. Kale stood utterly still. The grim warlord was gone, replaced by a man witnessing a miracle. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated awe. He had seen thousands of shifts, but he had never seen anything like this. She wasn't just changing form, she was embodying a concept. She was moonlight given flesh. Alara took a step, then another. Her new body felt more natural than her human one ever had. She was strength. She was grace. She was power tempered by peace. She bounded across the meadow, a streak of living silver, her movements impossibly fast and silent. She was not fighting the world, she was a part of it, moving in perfect harmony with the wind and the earth. She ran a wide circle around the clearing, the joy of it intoxicating. This was what she had been born for. This was her truth. As she loped back toward Kale, she saw his expression shift from awe to something else, a fierce, blazing pride. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, and in that look, she saw everything. His faith had been justified. His hope had been made real. Slowly, deliberately, she let the transformation recede. It was as smooth and painless as the shift itself. The silver fur melted away, the form shrinking back to her human self, leaving her standing in the clearing, breathless but whole. There was no exhaustion, no collapse. Only a steady, humming power coursing through her. For a long moment there was only the sound of the wind. Then, Kale closed the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but he stood so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of silver in the depths of his dark eyes. "What you did," he began, his voice hushed, as if in a sacred space. "That was not just a shift. That was an ascension." He shook his head, a gesture of pure wonder. "I have never felt such power." It was beautiful. The word, coming from him, sent a different kind of shiver through her. It wasn't about her appearance, it was about the nature of her power. It was beautiful. "I didn't force it," she said, her voice filled with the same wonder he felt. I invited it. I asked my wolf to run with me." "And she answered," Kale replied, a genuine, full smile finally gracing his features. It transformed him utterly, making him look younger, the weight of his crown momentarily lifted. "You have found the key. You have unlocked the first and greatest door." That night, a different kind of energy filled the Silver Citadel. News of the Moonmarket's first true, full shift had spread like wildfire, but it was not spoken of with frantic excitement. It was shared in hushed, reverent tones. A sense of tangible hope, a light in the growing darkness, had been kindled. Alara stood on her balcony, not as a frightened girl, but as a woman who had finally claimed a piece of her destiny. She had found her howl. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was a sound the darkness would learn to fear. Chapter 8. The Uninvited Guest. The newfound hope in the citadel was a fragile bloom, and the frost came sooner than anyone expected. It arrived not with a siege engine's roar, but with the desperate, staggering steps of a single man. Alara was in the library with Lyra, the heavy scent of old parchment and drying herbs a comforting constant. They were studying a complex diagram of lunar energy channels when a commotion from the outer walls echoed faintly through the stone halls, shouted orders, the clatter of armor, a single, strained voice raised in protest. Lyra's head came up, her wise eyes clouding with instant concern. Trouble. Before Alara could respond, the doors to the library swung open. Liam stood there, his face a mask of grim stone. "Your Majesty requires your presence in the throne room," he said, his gravelly voice tight. "An emissary from the Shadowfen has arrived." A cold dread, entirely separate from her fear of the cult, trickled down Alara's spine. Shadowfen. The word itself was a ghost, reaching from a past she had tried to bury. She exchanged a worried glance with Lyra before following Liam through the citadel's heart. The throne room was a place of immense power. The throne itself was carved from a single piece of obsidian, inlaid with silver that mapped the constellations. Kale sat upon it, no longer the teacher from the meadow, but the absolute monarch. His council, including Lyra who quickly took her place among them, stood in a stern semicircle. And in the center of the vast floor, on his knees, was a man so haggard and travel-worn he was barely recognizable. Reese. His clothes were torn and stained, his face gaunt, his knuckles bloody. The proud Alpha's son was gone, replaced by a desperate, broken shell. The scent of fear and exhaustion rolled off him in waves. When his eyes lifted and found Alara, the shame and regret in them were so potent it was a physical blow. Kale's voice was like cracking ice. "State your purpose, son of Borvin. Your presence here is an affront." Reese flinched at the tone, his gaze dropping from Alara's. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice a ragged scrape. "I have not come on my father's behalf. I have come to warn you." A tense silence filled the hall. Kale's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the arms of his throne. Warn me of what? My father, Rhys choked out, the words clearly painful. He has lost his mind. The humiliation of your intervention, it festered. It became a poison. He speaks of nothing but reclaiming our pack's honor, but his methods. He shook his head, a gesture of despair. He has made an alliance. The air in the room went stale. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what he was going to say next. With who? Kale's question was a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. Rhys looked up, his eyes filled with a terrified conviction. The Blood Moon Cult. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the council. Liam's hand went to the hilt of his sword. Lyra closed her eyes as if in pain. He met with their leader, Rhys continued, speaking faster now, the dam of his fear broken. A shadow they call the Corruptor. My father, he told them about Alara. He told them about the mark. He believes that if he helps them capture her, the Corruptor will grant him power beyond imagining and restore the Shadowfen to glory. His voice broke. They are planning an attack. A full-scale assault. Not with a few assassins, but with an army. Alara felt the floor lurch beneath her. Her own father figure, the man who had raised her, however cruelly, had sold her to the very darkness that sought to devour the world. The betrayal was so profound it felt like a physical wound. When? Kale's voice was deathly calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotion in the room. Rhys swallowed hard. During the next lunar eclipse. In 2 weeks' time. They know the eclipse weakens a normal wolf's connection to the moon. They believe it will be the perfect time to strike, when your people are at their most vulnerable. The strategic horror of it was undeniable. The eclipse was a known period of weakness, a time for defense, not daring assaults. To attack then was a move of brutal, calculated genius. Kale's gaze was a piercing lance, dissecting Rhys where he knelt. Why? Why betray your own father? Your own pack? Rhys finally looked at Alara again, and this time, he held her gaze. The anguish in his eyes was raw and real. Because what he is doing is not for the pack. It is for his own vanity. He is leading them to slaughter, allying with monsters that will destroy us all. He took a shuddering breath. And because I cannot stand by and let any more harm come to you, Alara. What I did, what I allowed to happen, it will haunt me for the rest of my days. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that, but I can at least try to prevent your death. Liam stepped forward, his voice a low growl. It could be a trap, my king. A ruse to lower our defenses. All eyes turned to Alara. She was the one who knew him best. She was the one who could sense the truth of his words. She looked at Rhys, at the broken prince kneeling in the hall of his enemy, and she did not see the cunning of a spy. She saw the ruins of the boy she had once known, crushed by the weight of his father's madness and his own complicity. She remembered the conflicted boy who had brought her a tunic in the woods. She remembered the shame in his eyes during the rejection ceremony. This was not a trick. This was a desperate, final attempt at redemption. He is telling the truth, Alara said, her voice clear and certain in the hushed room. She could feel the despair emanating from him, a sour, acrid scent that could not be faked. The despair, it's real. Kale trusted her intuition without question. He gave a curt, sharp nod. Take him to the guest quarters. He is to be kept under guard at all times. See that his wounds are treated and he is fed. He then turned his gaze to his council, his expression hardening into that of a general. You have your confirmation. Send the riders. Call the banners. We have 2 weeks to prepare for war. As guards moved to escort a visibly relieved but broken Rhys from the room, his eyes met Alara's one last time. It was a look of gratitude, of sorrow, of a goodbye to everything they had once been. Then he was gone. Later, Alara found Kale on the high ramparts, staring out at the mountain passes as if he could already see the enemy host marching through them. The weight of the coming conflict was a visible mantle on his shoulders. She came to stand beside him, the wind whipping strands of her silver hair across her face. We will face this, she said, echoing her words from the library. He didn't look at her. I curse the day that P. Ak ever laid eyes on you. They have been a chain around your neck since birth, and even now, broken and fleeing, they find a way to drag you toward destruction. You didn't bring this, she said firmly, turning to face him. You brought me out of the darkness. You gave me a home. A purpose. She took a step closer, her voice softening but losing none of its steel. Borvin and his monsters are not a threat. They are a test to prove that the light of the moon is stronger than any shadow. Kale finally turned to her. The worry in his eyes was a raw, exposed thing. Our mating ceremony will have to wait, he said, a hint of deep regret in his voice. The formal, public declaration of their bond, a source of stability and hope for the entire kingdom, was now a casualty of war. Alara's response was immediate and defiant. No, she said, her silver eyes glowing with an inner fire. Let's have it the night before the battle. Kale's breath caught. It was a bold, brilliant, defiant move. A statement of unshakable faith in the face of annihilation. Let's face them not just as a king and his ward, she continued, her voice gaining power, but as a destined pair, bound by the goddess herself. Let our union be the beacon that guides our people through the darkness. Let it be the light they see when the moon itself is blotted from the sky. In that moment, standing on the edge of the abyss, Kale saw not a girl to be protected, but a queen ready to claim her throne. His queen. The fear in his heart was not gone, but it was met and matched by a pride and a love so fierce it threatened to eclipse everything else. He did not touch her. He did not need to. The bond between them, forged in trust and tempered by coming war, was a force more tangible than any physical embrace. Then a beacon we shall be, he vowed, his voice a low, resonant promise that was carried away on the wind, a message to the gathering storm. The battle lines were drawn. The players were in place. And in the heart of the Silver Citadel, a love story was preparing to become a legend. Chapter 9. The Calm Before the Storm. The Citadel became a heart beating with a single, frantic purpose. Kale's command had been a spark to tinder, and now the entire mountain range seemed to vibrate with the energy of preparation. Yet, in the eye of this gathering hurricane, a different kind of energy also grew, softer, brighter, a defiant spark of hope against the encroaching dark. The announcement of the royal mating ceremony, to be held the night before the eclipse, swept through the ranks like a cleansing wind. It was not a decision born of romance, but of strategy. It was a statement. It was a flag planted firmly in the face of the enemy. We are not afraid. We are united. Our bond is our strength. For Alara, the days were a whirlwind. Her training with Kale intensified, shifting from discovery to application. Now that she could summon her wolf form at will, a seamless, painless flow of silver light, they worked on control. Speed. Precision. He taught her to move through the forest as a streak of silent moonlight, to use her unique aura not just as a shield, but as a weapon. Your light is purifying, Kale instructed, his voice sharp and focused as they sparred in the high meadow. Liam was her opponent, his movements a blur of controlled aggression. Do not meet his force with force. Unmake it. Alara, in her luminous wolf form, danced away from a sweeping strike. Instead of counter-attacking with tooth and claw, she focused, letting her silvery aura flare. As Liam lunged again, he passed through the edge of her light. He recoiled not from pain, but from disorientation, his aggressive intent momentarily unraveled, leaving him confused and off balance. Good. Kale's approval was a rare and potent reward. You see? You do not need to break your enemy. You simply remind him that the darkness he serves is a lie. In the afternoons, her time was no longer her own. Lyra and a flock of the Citadel's most skilled artisans took over. The simple, gray training clothes were replaced with fabrics of breathtaking beauty. They brought her gowns of silver-threaded silk that shimmered like a moonlit river, and soft, white leather armor etched with protective runes for the battle to come. She was measured, fitted, and fussed over in a way that was utterly alien. At first, she was uncomfortable with the attention, with the sheer opulence. It's too much, she protested as Lyra held up a delicate silver circlet set with a single, pale moonstone. It is symbolism, child, Lyra said gently, placing the circlet on her brow. The people need to see their queen. They need to see the living embodiment of the hope they are fighting for. You are not just a girl putting on a pretty dress. You are a standard being raised. The truth of it settled her. This was part of her duty now. To be visible. To be a symbol. One evening, she was brought to the Citadel's Great Hall, where the ceremony would take place. Workers were transforming the space. Silver and white banners hung from the high beams, and great wreaths of night-blooming jasmine and white roses were being woven around the pillars. The air was thick with their sweet, intoxicating scent. In the center of the hall, beneath a vast oculus open to the sky, a dais had been built. Standing there alone, Alara tried to imagine it. The hall filled with the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. Kale, standing beside her. The words of the binding vow being spoken. It should have felt like a dream. Instead, it felt like the most real thing she had ever done. A presence behind her made her turn. Kale stood at the entrance to the hall, watching her. He, too, had been absent, immersed in the grim logistics of war councils and troop deployments. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes pronounced, but his gaze as it rested on her was unwavering. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" he said, his voice echoing softly in the vast, preparing space. "To plan for a future when the next dawn is so uncertain." "It feels necessary," Alara replied, walking toward him. "It feels like we are building our own light, so we do not forget what we are fighting for when the darkness comes." He nodded slowly, his eyes tracing the lines of the hall, the emerging beauty amidst the fear. "The scouts report that the Shadowfen forces, bolstered by the cult, are massing at the edge of the Whispering Woods. They will be here in 3 days' time." The reality of it was a cold splash of water. 3 days. "Then we have 3 days to be ready," Alara said, her voice steady. Kale looked down at her, and the love in his eyes was a quiet, powerful thing, more potent than any grand declaration. "When I first saw you in that clearing, kneeling in the dirt, with that miraculous light blazing from your skin, I saw a weapon, a key to salvation. I saw the answer to a 1,000-year-old prayer." He took a step closer. "But now I see the woman who will stand beside me. Not behind me, beside me. And that is a gift I never dared to pray for." His words filled the hollow places inside her, the places that had been carved out by a lifetime of being told she was nothing. She didn't know what to say. No words seemed adequate, so she simply looked at him, letting him see the same conviction, the same unwavering trust reflected in her own silver eyes. The following day, a different kind of preparation began. The allied packs began to arrive. From the snowy peaks of the Howling Crags came the Frostmane pack, their wolves pale as the snow they lived on, their warriors silent and deadly. From the sun-baked canyons of the sun-scorched plains came the Emberclaw pack, their pelts the color of desert rock, their eyes burning with fierce loyalty to the crown. The Citadel's population swelled, the air now a mixture of dozens of different pack scents, a united front gathering under the silver banner of the king. Alara watched them from her balcony, this tapestry of wolves who had answered the call. They were not just fighting for a king. They were fighting for the idea he represented. And now, they would be fighting for her, too. On the eve of the ceremony, a deep, anticipatory silence fell over the citadel. The frantic work was done. The armies were camped in the valley below. The hall was ready. All that was left was to wait for the moon to rise. Alara stood once more in her chambers, now dressed in the ceremonial gown. It was a masterpiece of silver and white, flowing and elegant, yet allowing for freedom of movement. The moonstone circlet rested cool against her brow. She looked at her reflection in the polished silver mirror and saw a stranger, a queen from a legend. But when she looked into the eyes of the reflection, she saw herself. Alara, the flawed wolf, the moon-marked, the queen-to-be. She was no longer just one thing. She was all of them. And she was ready. Lyra entered, her eyes misty with emotion. "It is time, my dear." Taking a deep, steadying breath, Alara turned from the mirror. The path from her chambers to the great hall felt like the longest and shortest walk of her life. She could hear the murmur of the gathered crowd, a low, respectful hum. The doors to the hall stood before her, carved with the phases of the moon. As they swung open, the sight stole her breath. The hall was a vision of silver and starlight. Every noble, every alpha, every warrior of note was there, standing in silent reverence. And at the far end, standing on the dais under the open oculus, was Kale. He was resplendent in his formal armor of polished obsidian and silver, the crown of the Alpha King upon his head. But his eyes were only for her. As she began her walk down the long aisle, every gaze upon her, she felt not fear, but a profound sense of belonging. This was her pack. This was her family. This was her destiny. She reached the dais and took her place beside him. His hand found hers, his grip strong and sure. His touch was the final anchor, the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Under the watchful eye of the rising moon, with an army at their gates and a world hanging in the balance, the Alpha King and the moon-marked Queen began the ceremony that would bind their souls together, a beacon of defiant light in the face of the coming storm. Chapter 10. A Vow Forged in Moonlight. The air in the great hall was thick with the scent of jasmine and roses, but beneath it lay the sharp, clean smell of cold stone and the metallic hint of armored warriors. It was a silence so profound Alara could hear the soft rustle of her own gown as she moved, the collective, held breath of hundreds of werewolves, and the frantic, joyful hammering of her own heart. Kale's hand was warm and solid around hers, an anchor in the sea of staring eyes. But she did not feel judged. She felt, witnessed. The faces she saw as she walked were not filled with the contempt of the Shadowfen, but with a desperate, hopeful awe. They saw in her not a flaw, but their future. They reached the dais, standing beneath the open oculus where the full moon, still pure and silver, shone down upon them like a divine blessing. Lyra stood before them, her silver hair glowing in the moonlight, her presence a bridge between the earthly and the divine. We gather under the watchful eye of the goddess, Lyra's voice, though soft, carried to every corner of the hall, in a time of shadow, to bear witness to a union that is our light. This is not merely a joining of two souls, but the forging of a shield for our people. The Alpha King, our strength and our sword. The moon-marked, our hope and our salvation. She turned to Kale. King Kale, son of Alaric, of the line of the first kings. Do you, of your own free will, vow to bind your life, your strength, and your loyalty to this woman? To stand as her shield, to honor her as your equal, and to walk with her as one soul in two bodies, for as long as the moon shall grace the sky? Kale's gaze never left Alara's. His dark eyes, usually so full of royal command or strategic calculation, were now filled with a raw, unguarded intensity that made her breath catch. I do so vow. His voice was a low, resonant roll of thunder, a sound of absolute certainty. My strength is hers. My life is hers. My heart has known no other home. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. It was the vow of a king, but it was also the promise of a man. Lyra then turned to Alara. Alara, daughter of the moon, bearer of the mark of Selene. Do you, of your own free will, vow to bind your life, your power, and your loyalty to this man? To stand as his light, to be his counsel, and to walk with him as one soul in two bodies, for as long as the moon shall grace the sky? Alara looked at Kale, at the man who had pulled her from the mud and shown her the stars. She saw not just a king, but the boy who had traced constellations with her, the warrior who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself, the partner who now stood ready to face an army by her side. The words that rose to her lips were not from a script. They were from the deepest, most truthful part of her soul. I do so vow. Her voice was clear and strong, a silver bell ringing in the silence. My light is his. My heart is his. In his shadow, I found my own strength, and by his side, I have found my home. A soft, collective sigh seemed to move through the crowd. Lyra smiled, a beautiful, beatific sight. She took a braided cord of silver and obsidian thread, symbolizing their union, and gently wrapped it around their joined hands. By the power of the moon goddess, and by the witness of all gathered here, I seal this bond. What is spoken before the moon is eternal. You are now, and for all days, heart-bound. Two souls, one path. As the final word was spoken, something miraculous happened. The mark on Alara's shoulder began to glow, not with a frantic blush. but with a soft, steady, joyful light. At the same time, a shimmering silver aura, faint but visible, flickered around Kale. A ripple of awe went through the hall. The goddess herself was blessing the union, her power acknowledging the king who stood with her chosen one. Kale's eyes widened slightly, feeling the strange, new energy that danced along his skin, her energy, a part of her now intrinsically woven with his own. He tightened his grip on her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a silent, profound communication. There was no kiss, no grand, dramatic gesture. The moment was too sacred for that. The meeting of their hands, the glow of her mark, the shared aura, it was more intimate, more binding than any physical act could ever be. The spell was broken by Liam. He stepped forward, his stern face softened by a rare expression of deep respect. He drew his sword, the sound of steel ringing in the hall, and knelt before them, placing the blade flat across his palms. "My king, my queen," his voice was thick with emotion. "My sword, my life, and my loyalty are yours. Now and forever." As one, every single wolf in the great hall, alphas, warriors, council members, dropped to one knee. The sound of hundreds of knees hitting the stone floor was a single, thunderous crash of fealty. A forest of bowed heads stretched out before them. For the king, for the queen. The cry started with Liam, but was immediately taken up by every throat in the hall, a roaring wave of sound that shook the very foundations of the citadel. Alara stood there, her hand in Kale's, looking out at the sea of loyalty they had inspired. The orphan was now a queen. The outcast was now the heart of a nation. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of a joy so profound it was almost a pain. Kale raised their joined hands, and the hall fell silent once more. His voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a king who knew his people would follow him into the abyss. "The darkness comes at dawn," he declared, his voice ringing with power. "It comes to extinguish our light. It comes to break our spirit. But it has failed before it has even begun." He looked at Alara, his pride a blazing sun. "For tonight, we have created a light that no shadow can ever put out. Tomorrow, we do not just fight for survival. We fight for the future we have just sworn to build. We fight for each other." A roar of agreement, fierce and eager, answered him. The fear was gone, burned away by the certainty of this moment, by the power of the bond they had all witnessed. The celebration that followed was not one of wild revelry, but of solemn, determined unity. There was music and there was food, but the undercurrent was one of purpose. Warriors clasped forearms, their eyes speaking of the battle to come. Alphas, who had once been rivals, now shared strategies over cups of wine. Alara and Kale moved through the crowd together, their joined hands a constant, visible symbol of their bond. They accepted the blessings of their people, their presence a living talisman. Later, as the moon began its descent, they found a moment of quiet on a secluded balcony overlooking the sleeping city and the campfires of the Allied army glittering in the valley like a field of fallen stars. "Are you afraid?" Kale asked softly, his gaze on the distant lights. "Yes," Alara answered honestly, leaning her shoulder against his. The contact was electric and comforting. "But I am more angry than I am afraid. I am angry that they would try to take this from us. This," she gestured between them and at the citadel behind them. "This home we have built." He looked down at her, and the love in his eyes was a physical warmth. "Then we will funnel that anger into our light. We will make it so bright it burns the shadows from the sky." He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't have to. The vow had been spoken. The bond had been sealed. Every look, every touch, every shared breath was now a testament to it. As they stood there, the queen and her king, watching the last moments of peace slip away, they were no longer two individuals facing a war. They were a single force. A united front. A vow forged in moonlight, ready to meet the dawn. Chapter 11. The Eclipse of Hope. Dawn did not break so much as it bled. A slow, sickly ochre light seeped over the mountains, the sun struggling against a hazy, malevolent film in the upper atmosphere. An unnatural silence had fallen, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the nervous shifting of armor and the distant, mournful cry of a carrion bird. The lunar eclipse would begin in mere hours. Alara stood on the highest rampart of the citadel, no longer in her silver gown, but in the white, rune-etched leather armor. The moonstone circlet was still on her brow, a symbol of her office. Beside her, a pillar of obsidian and resolve, stood Kale. Below them, the united forces of the Silver Citadel and its allies were arrayed in formidable ranks, a sea of fur, steel, and grim determination. Their silence was more intimidating than any war cry. The first sign of the enemy was not sight, but smell. A foul, acrid stench carried on the wind, the odor of rot and corrupted magic. Then, a low, discordant drumming began, a rhythm that felt like a hammer against the soul. From the tree line at the valley's edge they emerged. The Shadowfen came first, their dark pelts a moving shadow. But they were different. Their eyes, once proud and fierce, now burned with a sickly, feverish red light. Borvin's madness had infected them all, twisting their forms, making them larger, more muscular, but hunched and bestial. They were puppets, their strings pulled by a darker master. And behind them came the true horror. The Blood Moon cultists. They were not wolves, but monstrous parodies. Their fur was matted and patchy, their bodies twisted with unnatural bone spurs, their maws dripping a viscous, black saliva. Their eyes were pools of solid crimson, devoid of any thought but mindless hunger. They moved in a shambling, relentless tide, a wave of pure corruption. At the very back, surrounded by his grotesque honor guard, was Alpha Borvin. He was mounted on a nightmarish creature that might once have been a bear. His form was swollen with borrowed power, his eyes blazing with insane triumph. And floating beside him, a patch of deeper darkness that drank the light, was the Corruptor. The sight of the gaunt, shadowy figure from her vision sent a bolt of pure, primal terror through Alara's heart. Kale's voice, amplified by his alpha power, roared across the valley, shattering the tense silence. Hold the line. For the Citadel. For the future. The two armies crashed together with a sound that split the world. It was not the clean ring of battle, but a wet, tearing, snarling cacophony. The Luna Guard, disciplined and fierce, met the corrupted Shadowfen head-on. Liam was a whirlwind of destruction, his sword a blur of silver, but for every cultist he cut down, two more seemed to take its place. Alara watched, her knuckles white on the stone parapet. This was not a battle, it was a slaughter in the making. The corruption was a tangible force, sapping the strength of the defending wolves. She could feel their connection to the moon, their source of power, flickering and fading as the eclipse began, a dark nibble taking a bite out of the silver orb in the sky. Now, Alara, Kale commanded, his voice tight. Give them back their strength. She closed her eyes, pushing back the terror. She reached for the bond she shared with Kale, feeling his steadfast strength flow into her. She reached for the mark on her shoulder, and instead of pulling from the weakened moon, she reached into the well of power inside herself, the power of Selene that was her birthright. She gathered it, focusing it not as a weapon, but as a gift. She raised her hands to the darkening sky, and a dome of pure, shimmering silver energy erupted from her. It expanded with breathtaking speed, covering the entire citadel and its defending army. The effect was instantaneous. Her allies straightened, their fading power surging back, their eyes clearing as the eclipse's debilitating effect was nullified within her shield. A roar of renewed vigor rose from their lines. But the Corruptor was waiting for this. A skeletal finger pointed directly at her from across the battlefield. A NTRATED wave of his cultists broke from the main horde, scaling the cliffs with unnatural agility, their target clear, the moon marked on the walls. Kale moved to intercept them, his shift a blur of controlled power. The massive black wolf that was the Alpha King met the first wave, his roar a promise of death. I am not a girl you need to protect, my love, Alara's voice, calm and clear, rang out over the din. I am your queen. And with a grace that defied the chaos, she leapt from the parapet. She didn't fall, she flowed. Her body dissolved into a cascade of liquid moonlight, solidifying midair into her true, ascended form. The magnificent silver wolf landed gracefully in the courtyard below, directly in the path of the charging cultists. They surged toward her, a wall of snapping jaws and corrosive darkness. Alara did not snarl. She did not cower. She stood her ground and simply was. Her aura of purifying light intensified, becoming a physical force. The lead cultists, as they entered the radius of her power, did not simply die. They unraveled. Their corrupted forms dissolved into wisps of black smoke and ash, their malevolent screams cut short as their very essence was unmade by her light. She was a sun in the courtyard, and the shadows could not exist in her presence. Kale, seeing her, fought with redoubled fury, a black tempest guarding his queen's flank. From his position, Alpha Borvin watched in apoplectic rage. His prize was not just defended, she was untouchable. The vessel, he screamed, his voice distorted. Take her. In his fury, he made a fatal error. He broke from the corruptor's side, leading his personal guard in a reckless charge toward the main gate, determined to break through and claim Alara himself. He never saw Kale coming. The Alpha King disengaged from his own fight, a black bolt of vengeance. He intercepted Borvin's charge, and the fight between the two Alphas was brutally short. Borvin, powered by madness and corruption, was strong, but he was unfocused, bloated with a power he could not truly control. Kale was precision. Kale was purpose. Kale was justice. With a final, powerful lunge, Kale's powerful jaws found their mark. The sound of snapping bone was a grim final note to Borvin's tragic story. The mad Alpha fell, his reign of terror ended by the king he had betrayed. But the true threat remained. The corruptor, seeing his pawn eliminated and his forces being systematically purified by Alara's light, unleashed his full power. He raised his arms, and a wave of pure, black necrotic energy, a void that devoured sound and light, shot across the battlefield, aimed directly at Alara's heart. It was a killing blow, meant to extinguish the moon's light forever. Time seemed to slow. Alara saw the darkness coming, a wave of absolute nothingness. She saw Kale's horrified look as he realized he could not reach her in time. But she was not afraid. She remembered the first Luna's song. She remembered the harmony of the mountain. She remembered the vow she had spoken just hours before. She met the corruptor's attack not with a shield, but with a song. She threw back her head and howled. It was the same melodic, powerful cry from the meadow, but now it was magnified 1,000-fold by her will, by her love, by her duty. A beam of concentrated, solidified moonlight, brilliant and blinding, erupted from her throat. It was not merely light, it was the essence of creation, of hope, of life itself. The beam tore through the void, shredding the necrotic energy like parchment. It crossed the battlefield in an instant and struck the corruptor full in the chest. He let out a sound that was not a scream, but the shriek of tearing reality. The darkness that composed him writhed and boiled, unable to withstand the purity of her power. The vessel cannot be, his dry, rustling voice gasped, filled with a shock that transcended millennia. And then, he exploded into a shower of dissipating shadows, his form utterly annihilated, his essence banished from the world. With their master destroyed, the remaining cultists lost their cohesion. Their mindless rage turned to confusion, then to dust, dissolving without his will to sustain them. The corrupted Shadowfen, freed from the insidious influence, faltered, their red eyes blinking back to normal, looking around at the carnage in dazed horror. The battle was over. As the eclipse ended and true moonlight washed over the bloodied valley, a profound silence fell, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fires. Alara, her luminous form fading back to her human self, stood panting in the suddenly still courtyard. She was unharmed. She was victorious. Kale, shifted back to his human form, rushed to her side, his hands coming up to cradle her face, his eyes searching hers for any sign of injury. Alara, I'm all right, she whispered, leaning into his touch, the adrenaline fading to leave a deep, bone-weary relief. All around them, as the surviving warriors understood what had happened, what she had done, they dropped to their knees. Luna Guard, Frostmane, Emberclaw, all of them. They bowed their heads not just to their king, but to their queen, the moon's chosen, who had not just led them to victory, but had saved their very souls. The war was won. The darkness was banished, and as Kale pulled Alara into the shelter of his arms, the first true dawn of their reign began to break, golden and clean over the silver citadel. Chapter 12. The Scars of Victory. The silence after the battle was a heavy, living thing. It was not peaceful. It was the silence of exhaustion, of shock, of the slow, painful process of counting the cost. The golden dawn that broke over the silver citadel did not feel like a celebration, it felt like a revelation, illuminating the full, brutal extent of the price they had paid. The courtyard, once a place of training and ceremony, was now a field of carnage. The air, once crisp with mountain purity, was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the foul, fading stench of corruption. Healers moved through the ranks of the wounded, their hands glowing with soft light as they worked alongside mortal physicians. The moans of the injured were a low, constant chorus of pain. Alara stood with Kale on the steps leading into the great hall, which had been hastily converted into a healing ward. The sight was overwhelming, so much suffering, so much loss. Her victory over the corruptor felt distant, a single bright star in a sky of overwhelming darkness. The purifying light that had flowed so effortlessly from her during the battle was now a dull, aching emptiness inside her. "We won," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Kale's hand found the small of her back, a steadying pressure. His own face was etched with a deep, weary grief. "We survived," he corrected gently. "Victory is a word for songs and stories. This," he gestured to the hall, "this is the reality. This is the cost of keeping our home safe." Liam approached, his armor stained and a fresh, angry scar running down his cheek. "The initial counts are in, Your Majesties," he reported, his voice rougher than usual. "Our losses are significant. The Frostmane Alpha fell defending the eastern wall. We lost many of the Luna Guard's finest." He paused, his jaw tight. "The Shadowfen, those who survived the corruption, are broken. They are being disarmed and contained. They look lost." Alara's heart ached for them. They had been victims as much as anyone, twisted by Borvin's madness and the corruptor's evil. "They are not prisoners, Liam," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "They are refugees. See that they are cared for. Fed. Their wounds are treated the same as ours." Liam looked at Kale, who gave a firm nod. "The Queen's word is law. See it done." As Liam moved away to carry out her orders, a new kind of respect in his eyes, Alara felt the weight of her crown for the first time, not as a symbol, but as a responsibility. These decisions were hers to make now. She did not retreat to her chambers. She walked among the wounded, her silver gown traded for a simple, serviceable tunic. She did not have the healer's magic, but she had her presence. She knelt beside a young warrior from the Emberclaw pack, his leg mangled. His eyes were wide with pain and fear. "Your Majesty," he gasped, trying to sit up. "Shish," she said softly, placing a cool hand on his fevered brow. "Be still." She didn't know what to do, so she simply stayed with him, her calm presence a small anchor in his sea of agony until a healer could arrive. She did the same for an older member of the Luna Guard, holding a cup of water to his lips as he shivered from shock. She saw Reese among the Shadowfen survivors, sitting with his back against a wall, his head in his hands. He was unscathed physically, but the look in his eyes was one of utter devastation. He had lost his father, his pack, his home, and any last shred of his former identity. He looked up and met her gaze, and the shame there was so profound it was a physical force. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was not forgiveness. That would take time, but it was an acknowledgement. He had chosen the right path in the end. He looked away, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his face. Kale was everywhere at once, a pillar of strength for his people. He conferred with his generals, approved defense repairs, and offered quiet words of gratitude to his wounded warriors. But his eyes always returned to Alara, watching her move among the people with an innate grace and compassion that no royal training could ever provide. She was not just a queen by title, she was a queen by nature. Later, in the relative quiet of their private chambers, the full force of the day finally hit her. The images of the battle, the sounds, the smells, they crashed over her in a nauseating wave. She began to tremble, the adrenaline crash leaving her cold and hollow. Kale was there in an instant, leading her to a chair by the fire. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders and knelt before her, taking her icy hands in his warm, strong ones. "I can still see it," she whispered, staring into the flames. "The darkness, the way it unraveled them. I unmade them, Kale." "You destroyed a corruption," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You did not take lives, you gave them peace. You ended a suffering that had no other cure. What you feel is not guilt, Alara. It is the weight of power. The understanding that your actions, however righteous, have consequences. A true leader never forgets that weight. It is what keeps them humble. It is what keeps them kind." His words were a balm. He understood. He carried the same weight, had for centuries. "The healing will take time," he continued. "For the Citadel, for the Pax, for us." He looked at their joined hands, the symbolic cord from their ceremony now a permanent, delicate bracelet on each of their wrists. "We will bear these scars together. They are not just wounds. They are reminders of what we fought for, of what we protected." He was right. The scars outside and the scars within were a testament to their survival. The victory was not clean, it was not glorious, but it was real. And in the quiet, shared space of their recovery, the bond they had sealed in ceremony was being forged into something unbreakable in the fires of shared grief and responsibility. The war was over, but the true work of building a lasting peace was just beginning. And as Alara looked at her king, her partner, she knew they were ready for it. Together. Chapter 13. The Weight of the Crown. The Citadel was a body in recovery. The physical scars of the battle, the scorched stones, the splintered gates, were slowly being repaired, the sounds of hammers and saws a hopeful counterpoint to the recent memory of clashing steel. But the deeper wounds, the ones etched into the spirit of its people, healed at a much slower pace. A pervasive grief lingered in the halls, a quiet sorrow for the fallen that was shared in the lowered voices of the healers and the somber looks exchanged between warriors. Alara felt it all. Her empathic connection to the world, once a source of confusion, was now a finely tuned instrument that resonated with the pain around her. The joy of her victory had been real, but it was a fleeting island in a vast sea of loss. The weight of the crown was no longer a symbol. It was the collective grief of a kingdom, and it rested heavily on her brow. She spent her days not in the seclusion of royal chambers, but immersed in the life of the Citadel. She was a constant presence in the healing wards, her quiet compassion a comfort to those grappling with pain and loss. She walked the walls with the guards, her simple acknowledgement of their duty bolstering their weary spirits. She sat in on council meetings with Kale, listening more than she spoke, learning the intricate web of alliances, trade, and governance that held the kingdom together. It was during one such council meeting that the first true test of her reign arrived. A delegation from the Frostmane pack had arrived, led by their new alpha, a stern, grieving woman named Anya. She had taken command after her father fell in the battle. She stood before the obsidian throne, her posture rigid, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "Your Majesties," Anya began, her voice like chips of ice. "The Frostmane pack answered your call. We spilled our blood on your soil to defend your home. My father, our Alpha, gave his life for your cause. The kingdom is forever in your debt, Alpha Anya," Kale responded, his tone respectful but firm. "His sacrifice, and the sacrifice of your people, will be honored for generations." "Honor does not warm my people through the coming winter," Anya countered, her gaze sharp. "Our hunters were among the bravest, and now they are dead. Our res are low. The mountain passes to our territory are treacherous, and without a strong hunting party, we face starvation." She looked directly at Alara. The prophecies spoke of a queen who would bring unity and restoration. "We have seen your power in battle, Moonmarked. We need to see it in peace. What will you do for us now, when the battle is won and the songs have faded?" The challenge hung in the air. The other council members watched Alara, curious to see how the new queen would handle her first political crisis. This was not an enemy to be unmade with light. This was a leader, justified in her grief and fear, demanding tangible help. Kale shifted, ready to speak, to offer resources from the Citadel's stores, but Alara placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. This was her responsibility. She stood from her throne and walked down the dais to stand before Anya, putting them on equal footing. She did not flinch from the Alpha's icy gaze. "Your father was a hero," Alara said, her voice clear and carrying through the council chamber. "And your people's courage is the reason we stand here today, in a free citadel." "You are right. Honor is a cold comfort for an empty belly." She turned to address the entire council. "The Frostmane Pack is not a separate entity that came to our aid. They are part of this kingdom. Their hunger is our hunger. Their struggle is our struggle." She looked back at Anya. "You will not face the winter alone." She then outlined a plan, not as a request, but as a declaration. "We will dispatch a contingent of the Luna Guard, our most skilled hunters, to accompany your remaining people back to your territory. They will help you hunt and secure your food stores for the winter. Furthermore, we will open a permanent trade route. The Citadel's southern valleys are fertile. Our grain, our preserved meats, will flow north to you in exchange for the unique ores and gems from your mountains. We will not just give you a fish, Alpha Anya. We will teach you to fish in new waters, and we will build a bridge between our peoples so that no pack in this kingdom ever has to face hardship alone again." The council was silent, stunned. It was a generous offer, but more than that, it was a radical shift in policy. It proposed a level of integration and mutual support that had never been formally attempted. Anya stared at Alara, the cold anger in her eyes slowly giving way to a flicker of stunned calculation, and then, grudging respect. She had expected charity, perhaps even dismissal. She had not expected a partnership. "You would do this?" Anya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am your queen," Alara replied, her silver eyes holding a steady, unwavering light. "It is my duty, not just to rule, but to care for all my people. Your strength is our strength. Your survival is our survival. That is what unity means. That is the restoration the prophecy promised." She turned to Kale. "With the king's agreement, of course." Kale looked at her, and the pride in his eyes was a blazing sun. He saw not just the woman he loved, but the ruler she was born to be. "The queen's wisdom guides us," he said, his voice full of authority. "It shall be done." Alpha Anya bowed her head, a deep, genuine gesture of fealty she had not offered upon entering. "The Frostmane Pack accepts. And we thank you, your majesty." As the delegation left, the mood in the council chamber had shifted. The lingering grief was still there, but it was now mixed with a new, potent sense of purpose. The queen had not just solved a problem, she had laid the foundation for a stronger, more resilient kingdom. Later, alone with Kale in their chambers, the weight of the day finally settled on her. "Was it the right decision?" she asked, a thread of uncertainty in her voice. "It will strain our own resources." Kale came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "It was not just right, Alara. It was brilliant. You saw the long path, not just the immediate obstacle. You did not give her a gift, you offered her a place at the table. That is how true loyalty is built. Not through fear or debt, but through shared destiny." He turned her to face him. "You worried about the weight of the crown," he said softly. "But today, you did not carry it alone. You used it to build a shelter for your people. That is the secret of ruling. The crown is heaviest when worn in isolation. Its weight becomes a power when shared to lift others up." Alara leaned into his touch, the last of her tension melting away. The path of a queen was fraught with challenges, but she was not walking it alone. She had her king, her partner, her equal. And together, they would not just rule a kingdom. They would heal it. Chapter 14. The Shadow's Legacy. The Citadel's recovery was a slow, deliberate dance. The Frostmane Agreement had set a powerful precedent, and soon, emissaries from other packs were arriving, not with demands, but with hopes of similar alliances. Alara, with Kale's steadfast support, navigated these new waters with a surprising blend of compassion and shrewdness. She was learning the language of statecraft, her innate empathy allowing her to see the true needs behind the formal requests. But one shadow from the past remained, a quiet, unresolved chord in the symphony of their new beginning: Rhys and the surviving Shadowfen wolves. They were housed in a segregated section of the Citadel's lower levels, not as prisoners in dungeons, but as uneasy guests under guard. They were a broken people. The fire of their former arrogance was extinguished, replaced by a hollow-eyed shame and a deep-seated confusion. They had followed a madman into darkness, and now they were adrift, their identity shattered, their future a terrifying blank. Alara felt their collective despair like a constant, low hum at the edge of her awareness. It was a different pain from the physical wounds of battle, deeper, more insidious. She knew she had to face it. She had to face him. She went to their quarters alone, dismissing the guards at the door with a quiet command. The large, Spartan hall fell silent as she entered. Dozens of pairs of eyes, once full of scorn, now watched her with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a desperate, flickering hope. Rhys stood apart from the others, leaning against a far wall, his arms crossed. He looked up as she entered, and the shame in his gaze was so intense it was like a physical blow. He quickly looked away, unable to hold her stare. Alara did not ascend a dais or stand on ceremony. She walked to the center of the room, her simple gray tunic a stark contrast to the memory of her battle glory. "You knew me as the flawed one," she began, her voice calm and clear, carrying through the silent hall. "You saw only what your alpha commanded you to see. A weakness, a stain." She paused, letting her words settle. "I saw the same when I looked in the mirror. For 18 years, I believed it." She walked slowly, making eye contact with one, then another. She saw faces she recognized, warriors who had shoved her, youths who had laughed, elders who had condemned her. "The man who taught you to hate me is gone," she continued. "The darkness that poisoned your minds has been banished. So I ask you now, who are you? Without Borvin's rage to define you? Without the cult's corruption to drive you?" A profound silence met her question. They had no answer. Rhys finally pushed himself off the wall, his voice a ragged scrape. "We are nothing, Alara. We are the pack that betrayed the moon herself. There is no place for us." "Is that what you believe?" she asked, turning to him fully. "Or is that just another lie you've been told?" She stopped before a young warrior, no older than she was, who was cradling a bandaged arm. "What is your name?" The young wolf looked startled. "Yoren, your majesty." "Yoren," she repeated softly. "During the last great hunt before my rejection, you shared your waterskin with me when others had denied me. I never forgot that small kindness." Yoren's eyes widened in shock that she remembered. She moved to an older woman. "Mara, you were the one who secretly left salve for the wounds on my back after a training session with the elders. You risked punishment for a half-wolf you were told was cursed." The woman, Mara, bowed her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Ella." Ra turned back to address them all. "You were not all monsters. You were a pack, a family, led astray. You were taught that strength was cruelty and power was domination. But that is not the way of the moon goddess. True strength is in resilience. True power is in unity." She walked back to the center, her gaze sweeping over them, now filled not with accusation, but with a fierce, determined compassion. "The past cannot be changed. The lives lost cannot be returned. But the future is a page not yet written. You have a choice. You can cling to the shame until it consumes you, or you can pick up the pieces and build something new." She looked directly at Rhys. "The Shadowfen pack, as it was, is gone. It died with Borvin on that battlefield. But its people remain. You have a knowledge of the dark marshes, of the harsh territories no other pack can navigate. You are survivors." She unveiled her plan, her voice gaining the same steady authority she had used in the council chamber. "You will not be absorbed into other packs, losing your identity. You will not remain here as permanent guests. You will return to the Shadowfen territories." A ripple of disbelief went through the crowd. "Return?" Rhys breathed, confusion etched on his face. "Yes," Alara said, "but not as you were. You will be the kingdom's wardens of the marshes. Your duty will be to heal the land that was poisoned by the cult's presence. You will guard the borders from any lingering threats. You will use your strength to protect, not to prey. The citadel will support you, with supplies, with builders, with guidance. But the legacy you build from this day forward will be your own. She walked up to Rhys, stopping an arm's length away. They need a leader, Rhys. Not one who leads through fear and inherited title, but one who has felt the consequences of that path and has chosen a different one. They need the son who was brave enough to defy his father for what was right. The question is, are you still that man? Rhys looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, the shame in his eyes was joined by something else, a dawning, fragile sense of purpose. He saw not the girl he had failed, but the queen offering him, offering all of them, a chance at redemption. He slowly, hesitantly, went down on one knee. He placed his fist over his heart, the traditional Shadowfen salute, but now it felt different. It felt like a vow. The Shadowfen, he began, his voice cracking. He stopped, then started again, stronger. We accept this charge, Your Majesty. We will become the wardens. We will heal the land. We will earn our place in this kingdom. One by one, throughout the hall, the other Shadowfen survivors followed his lead. They knelt, not as defeated prisoners, but as sworn guardians, their head. Bowed not in shame, but in loyalty. Alara reached out and placed her hand on Rhys's shoulder. It was a simple touch, but it sealed a pact, closed a wound, and began the mending of a broken people. As she left the hall, she felt the low hum of their despair shift. It was not gone, but it was changing, transforming into the determined, steady rhythm of a people with a purpose. The Shadow's legacy would not be one of darkness, but of a hard-won light. And in offering them a future, Alara felt the last of her own past wounds finally, truly, begin to heal. Chapter 15. A New Moon Rising. A full cycle of the moon had passed since the battle. The Silver Citadel no longer bore the raw, bleeding wounds of war. The scars remained, but they were fading, becoming part of its history, its strength. The air, once heavy with grief and the stench of corruption, now carried the crisp promise of autumn and the vibrant energy of a people reborn. On this night, the great hall was filled once more, but the atmosphere was profoundly different from the tense unity of the mating ceremony. This was a celebration, a true, unburdened celebration of life, of peace, of a future they had all fought to secure. There was music, lively and joyful, and the hall was filled with the laughter of wolves from every corner of the United Kingdom, Frostmane, Emberclaw, Luna Guard, and even a small, solemn delegation of the newly sworn wardens of the marsh, led by a Rhys who stood a little taller, his eyes clear for the first time. Alara stood with Kale on the dais, watching their people. She wore a gown of deep blue, the color of the twilight sky, and her moonstone circlet gleamed. She no longer felt like an imposter in her own skin or in her role. The crown was a part of her now, its weight a familiar and welcome responsibility. Kale's hand found hers, his touch as natural as breathing. He leaned close, his voice for her alone. "Look at them," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over the joyous crowd. "You did this. Your light did not just banish the darkness on the battlefield. It lit a fire in their hearts. We did this," she corrected softly, turning to him. Her silver eyes, once so full of fear and pain, now shone with a deep, abiding love and hard-won peace. "Your strength was the fortress. My light was just the lantern inside it." He shook his head, a small, private smile on his lips. "No, my love, you were the dawn. I was merely the mountain fortunate enough to be the first thing you touched with your light." The music shifted to a slower, more melodic tune. It was a traditional dance of unity, one often performed at the end of a great conflict. Without a word, Kale led her down from the dais and onto the open floor. The crowd parted for them, watching with warm, respectful smiles. As they began to move, it was not the practiced steps of royalty, but the natural, fluid harmony of two souls perfectly in sync. His lead was firm yet gentle, her follow was trusting and sure. They moved together, a study in contrasts, his dark, solid strength and her ethereal, silver grace, yet they were a single, beautiful entity. "Do you remember," Alara said quietly as they turned, "the girl you found kneeling in the dirt?" "I remember the queen I found waiting to rise," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. I remember the most courageous soul I have ever known. I was so afraid, she confessed. So was I, he admitted, surprising her. He pulled her just a fraction closer, their movements intimate despite the watching crowd. I was afraid I would fail you. That I would not be strong enough to protect the hope you represented. But you never needed my protection, Alara. You only ever needed my faith. And you gave it to me, she whispered. When no one else would. You saw me. I see you still, he vowed, his dark eyes holding hers captive. And I will see you for all the moons to come. The dance ended, and as the final note faded, the hall erupted in applause, not for their skill, but for the symbol they represented. The united king and queen, the heart of a new, stronger kingdom. Later, they escaped the festivities, finding their way to the high ramparts where their journey together had truly begun. The world was bathed in the serene light of the full moon, the same moon that had witnessed her humiliation, her terror, her triumph, and her love. It looked down upon a land at peace. Alara leaned against the stone balustrade, Kale standing close behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her head. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a love that needed no words. It is over, she said, the words a soft exhalation. Truly over. No, Kale murmured into her hair. It is not an ending, my queen. It is a beginning. The beginning of our reign. The beginning of the world we will build together. He was right. The war against the darkness was won, but the gentle, persistent work of nurturing the light was the task of a lifetime. A lifetime they would share. Alara looked up at the moon, her moon, and felt a profound sense of completion. The flawed wolf was gone. The outcast was home. The orphan had a family, a people, a king who was her soul's other half. She was Alara, the moon-marked, the queen, and as a new moon would inevitably rise after this one set, so too would their story continue, a legend not just of battle and destiny, but of a love that had healed a broken girl and, in doing so, had helped to heal a kingdom. Under the gentle gaze of the moon, surrounded by the peace they had forged, the Alpha King and his lunar queen stood together, ready for every dawn to come. Like, subscribe, and comment for part 2.